All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us wherever you are in the world. We are coming to you from Wyoming, and I've got Dr. Douglas Petersen here. He is professor and the Maggie and Dick Scarlett Endowed Chair at the University of Wyoming, and he's going to be presenting on the CUBED-3 tonight on Insight. And if you guys have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We've got Dr. Megan Kirby, and we've got Christy Jones joining us from LDG, and we'd be happy to answer questions for you. So it's all you, Dr. Petersen.
Okay, thanks, Elisa. Thank you all for joining us today, tonight, this morning, wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure to just spend an hour with all of you. And we're going to chat a little bit about the CUBED-3. I'm very excited about sharing this with you. This is our research project that Trina Spencer and I, along with many of the people here who've been working with me for a long time, we've been working on this for a long time. So I'm excited to share it with everybody. I am going to start out with just kind of establishing the momentum, the impetus, the purpose, why we did this. So Trina Spencer and I met in 2006, and we have been working on a way to measure oral language with in a system that will that requires an assessment that is efficient and that's also valid. And that has been sort of a project of ours that we have loved for a long time, and we're just excited to share with you what we have. So I'm going to share just my screen really fast here, and I'm just going to get rolling with just a couple of slides, and then I'm going to just dive right into the assessment. So this is really what we have built this research around, this idea that academic language is necessary for academic success. And this is almost an axiomatic statement, especially when you come to recognize the crucial role that language plays in students' performance in school, with reading, with writing, even in math, really across the full spectrum of the academic experience. And academic language is so crucial. And these next two bullet points are just almost unbelievable, really. The system-wide assessment of language is absent most of the time or lacks validity, especially with our young students. Now, that's actually a really astounding statement if you think about the fact that oral language is so crucial, and that understanding which students are successfully understanding and producing the complex academic language they need to be successful. That knowledge is lacking other generally than just what is anecdotally observed very often. Now, we do have assessments, of course, that are used all the time, but for young children, they primarily focus on word recognition. And so that second bullet point is just absolutely astounding to me, but it's generally true. If you talk to a first grade teacher and ask them, how are your students doing with reading? Most of the time, the data that they will have will be on phonemic awareness or letter sounds or something related to word level reading, to word recognition. And if you ask them, how are your students doing with the comprehension of academic language, with complex language, with the production of that, you'll get anecdotal information, of course, which is valuable, but really not standardized approach, standardized data that come from something that's been validated. So also explicit, systematic, cumulative intervention is often very absent in our school system. Now, there are approaches, of course, that many of our amazing teachers adopt and use, where shared storybook reading, dialogic reading, those are beautiful things. But think about the extent to which the practices are cumulative in nature and sequential, in addition to explicit, systematic. And think about the extent to which that language instruction requires students to not only listen to the complex language that's typically in written form, but to also produce it in oral or written form. So we have things to gain and things to learn. We're going to focus mostly on that second bullet point. And now I'm going to share with you all something that I'm sure that you are all familiar with, and this is Hollis Scarborough's reading rope model. And this drove the development of the cubed greatly. So we have first started with the simple view of reading. Of course, it is a very zoomed out view, and we wanted to get much more detailed about what aspects of language and what aspects of word recognition we needed to measure and we needed to monitor. So we did use this. And then, there are contributions, of course, from other models, including Duke and Cartwright, where you consider executive function, self-regulation, things like that. And those certainly can play a role as to whether a student is comprehending what they read. So kind of just establishing really where we're at in our theoretical thinking and the problem that we're trying to tackle. And it is really quite a problem because the cubed is supposed to be a universal screener and a progress monitoring tool, and it is supposed to measure word recognition and language and the product of those. So it has two major sections to it. I'm going to focus mostly on the NLM, the narrative language measures today, but there's also the dynamic decoding measures. Now, the dynamic decoding measures, the reason why I'm going to set it aside a little bit today is because many school districts have already adopted an approach to universal screening and progress monitoring for word recognition related skills. And that's been around for a long time now. And there's some great stuff out there. Now what the DDM provides you is something that is pretty fine-grained. So you are able to identify specifically which syllable types and affixes students are having difficulty recoding with nonsense words. It measures irregular words. It measures students' ability to read temporarily and permanently irregularly spelled words, letter sounds, and our kindergarten teachers often will focus on letter names as well. And then phonemic awareness tasks are included in this dynamic decoding measures. And it's designed as a benchmark assessment, which tells you whether a student is meeting benchmark expectations, but it's also designed to inform instruction. And so through this assessment, it's not necessarily required that you go and dig a lot deeper with other tests to identify what the student needs help with. So on the NLM, the narrative language measures, there's two parts. There's the reading and the listening. Now, they're very, very similar to each other. They primarily just differ in the modality, how you access the language. So with reading, the children are, obviously, they are reading some of the passage or all of the passage, depending. And with listening, they're listening to a passage. And then they're asked to retell. Now, you can see that what we're measuring is language at the discourse level, at the sentence complexity, and the vocabulary complexity level. And we also measure children's ability to answer factual questions, inferential vocabulary questions, and inferential reasoning. And I'll show you all what that looks like. Now, with the reading, of course, you also gain information on a child's reading fluency. And the cubed provides you information on rate and accuracy, percent of words read correctly, and a prosody rating. And also, you're able to obtain writing samples from children through the NLM reading subtest. With the listening, you're able to obtain the personal story that children can produce, and that is something that we just probe frequently. Okay, so now let me just establish something here. What's the purpose of the cubed? Why do we have it? Well, I mean, it goes back a long ways. It doesn't go all the way back to Stan Dino and Doug Fuchs back in the 80s. But the research that they were doing, this is really a continuation of that research. So their attempt to identify a way to efficiently and effectively monitor comprehension, that was something that they have been working on and worked on for a long time. And they landed on oral reading fluency as a general outcome measure for comprehension. They primarily focused on that because of the correlation that oral reading fluency has with comprehension, especially with the young children. And it meets all of these other things in one way or another, to some degree or another. Now, there have also been approaches to measuring comprehension, such as counting the number of words a child retells back to you, having children identify one of 3 words in a maze task, answering comprehension questions, things like that. Now, the reason why the language sample analysis hasn't been used is because it has been very difficult to do language sample analysis in a time-efficient way that's easy to do, easy to administer and score for everyone. Now, I don't know anyone, or there are very few probably, who would call into question the extent to which a language sample likely reflects a student's language ability. So the validity part with language sample analysis is pretty strong. Of course, there are different ways to collect language samples, so that can vary. But you know, really, what better way to measure a construct than to simply measure that construct? How do you know if a child is understanding and producing complex language? Well, let's have them understand and produce complex academic language, see if we can measure that. Speech language pathologists have been doing language sample analysis for a long, long time. The trick here is that it has to be time efficient and easy to use. And we'll see how well Dr. Spencer and I and colleagues have put this together for everyone so that it's actually feasible to do. Because, and I don't want to denigrate anything, but let's be clear, counting the words that a child says to you, or asking a child to answer a question or identify one of 3 words like John went to the mountains to go look for some deer stop pink. It's easy to call into question the extent to which something like that is actually measuring a child's ability to understand and produce complex academic language. So often validity has been sacrificed for the sake of reliability and efficiency. I don't think that's necessary anymore. So the CUBED has, as I mentioned, 2 major sections. So the DDM, the dynamic decoding measures, this is aligned with the lower strands of Scarborough's rope primarily. So we have measures that give you information on sight recognition, phonological awareness, primarily phonemic awareness, and decoding. And I won't spend a lot of time on what that looks like. Most of you are very familiar with tasks that are similar to what you see in the CUBED DDM. Now, also, the CUBED NLM was designed to align with multiple strands of Scarborough's rope that are related to comprehension, to language comprehension. And you can see the different subtests and how they align to background knowledge and inferencing, sentence complexity, vocab, and so forth. So I'll go through each of those a little bit. Now, language is best assessed as a integrated communication modality. So the reason why we use language is to communicate. And we know that the best way to measure and to do language intervention, by the way, is in a contextualized form that's as meaningful as possible. So our approach is focused on narratives. Now, we're not choosing narratives at random, and we're certainly not choosing narratives because that's the only thing that you can do to measure language. But the reason why we've chosen narrative language primarily is because narrative language requires children in general to produce complex language. Now, that's not because they're trying to show off or because they want to sound like they're really smart or anything like that. It is just simply the fact that when you tell a story, what you are doing is telling someone something that they probably did not experience themselves as the person listening. They weren't there, they didn't see it happen, and you have to paint the world with your words. Now, that requires you to use tier 2 vocabulary that is precise, that is specific. It requires you to talk about causal relationships and temporal events, things that happen in sequence. And that requires you to use temporal and causal adverbial subordinate clauses. And if you want to be descriptive, you're going to use adverbs, you're going to be you're using adjectives, you're going to use relative, adverbial, or relative subordinate clauses, all of that. Okay, now look, I realize that this is the reason why speech language pathologists go and get a master's degree in speech language pathology to learn about what all these things are and how to analyze them. And that's not a realistic expectation for something that's supposed to be administered by teachers, paraprofessionals, anyone that the school district provides some training for, and then ask them to go and administer this universal screener. So we've kind of got some shortcuts there, and I'll show you what that looks like. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to break out of the slides, and I'm actually going to go right into the digital cubed. Now, this is the login page, and it's about as easy as you would imagine. There's an email and a password, and you log in. Now, I'm going to open up a page where that's already done, which is right over here. So this is what the page looks like, your dashboard, your home screen in the digital cubed. Now, you're not going to spend a lot of time in here probably. What you'll do is you'll spend time in the students section and the reports section. So I'm going to go to students. Now what happens is you can batch upload your students into the system, or you can enter them in one by one if you'd like. And what it does is the system will then list your students over here on the left. Now this is all just made up data that I'm using for a demo. And what you do is you can have all of the students that you've put in, and then students can be assigned to you, your classroom, your caseload, whatever it might be. Now, it's really as easy as this. You have your students in the system and you want to test them. So you just click assess right here. Okay, now, what test do I want to administer? This child right here is in first grade. Okay, so I want to do an NLM reading with this first grader. And let's say that I want to do middle of the year. Okay, so I'm going to click on middle of the year, and then I'm just going to click on take test. Okay. Now, this is the screen that comes up. A couple of things to orient you to this assessment. It tells you what to say right here in bold, okay? And so you'll say exactly word for word what it says. Please read this out loud. Do your very best reading. I'll help you if you need it. When you're done, I'm going to ask you to tell me the exact same story, and I'm going to ask you some questions. Are you ready? Now, this is, mind you, middle of the year, first grade. The first 50 words in this passage that the student is going to read is mostly decodable in the sense that a lot of the words are consonant, vowel, consonant, closed syllable words. There are some vowel teams, and there's some vowel consonant E's, some silent E's in here, but it's pretty, it's fairly decodable. Now, of course, it's really hard to make something decodable uniform across all different curriculum, but this is an attempt that we have here of making this first part as decodable as we can. Now the student reads for 1 minute, and you track how well they can read these words. You start the timer, and the student starts reading, and as they're reading, you will click on the words that they have difficulty with, okay? So there's some instructions up here that tell you exactly how to do it. You'll be very familiar with how to do this assessment if you've administered an oral reading fluency task before. So as the student is reading, what we'll do is let's pretend like the timer stops and it's 1 minute. Then this little thing shows and it says, click on the last word that student read, and I'll do that. And now what this program does is it tells me the correct number of words read in 1 minute, it tells me that student's accuracy, and then I make a determination on that student's prosody, okay? So here you can see the words that the student had difficulty reading, and that shows up later also in reports. And now I'm not done though. So the student got to right here. Now what I'm going to do now as the examiner is I'm going to read the rest of the passage to them because I want to know how well the student can retell all of the parts of a story, as well as understand and produce complex academic language. Now, I did not require them to read complex academic language that they have not been taught to decode. What I'm asking them to read are things that they likely have been taught to decode. Now, from here on out, I'm going to read the rest. So the story is one day Ron was with his dad at a fun park. He wanted to go on all the fun rides. He stopped at a tall ride that was fast and spun a lot. He went on it, but at the end of the ride, he started to feel sick. Now, notice the shift here from the decodable to the complex academic language. He was scared because his stomach suddenly felt uneasy. Ron decided to find his dad, who was nearby. He urgently said, "I went on a ride that rapidly rotated and I might throw up." Ron's dad replied, "Since you feel sick, it sounds like you have motion sickness. Let's find a calm, relaxing place so that you can rest." Ron's dad told him about motion sickness. Here's some expository. He explained it happens when you stop moving, but the fluid in your ears doesn't, and it can make you nauseous. His dad quickly found a nearby bench and had Ron sit down. After several minutes, Ron felt relieved because he didn't feel sick anymore. Then he blissfully rode calmer carnival rides, which didn't spin for the rest of the day. Now, you might be thinking, now that's pretty complex language for a first grader in the middle of the school year. And you're right, it is. And guess what? About probably around 50 to 60% of your students are going to struggle with understanding and producing this complex language. And that is going to mirror the performance of your students on high stakes assessments that measure reading comprehension. And the reason why it mirrors that is because those students are the ones who are struggling with understanding what they read when they are asked to read this kind of complex language. Now, this is not a hopeless case, though, by any means. Most of the children in the United States and across the world have typical language learning ability, and it is actually a remarkable skill that humans have. So it is astounding, actually, to speech-language pathologists. It's often very astounding to watch the language develop in children. And what happens is that when you immerse children in a world of complex language where they are required to listen to it and also produce it, this is something that they are able to do. Now, just bear with me here and just think about the solution to this problem that I've presented at the beginning of this webinar. Academic language is a skill pivotal repertoire for success in school, and attention to it is nearly absent. Now, if most children have typical language learning ability, and the problem that we primarily have in reading across this country, and I'm not dismissing word recognition or decoding or the importance of systematic and explicit phonics instruction in any way. What I am suggesting, though, is that if that is, of course, our exclusive focus, which I know no one wants it to be, that will not yield the results we are looking for, because a lot of children struggle with comprehension of this complex language. So if we immerse them in that world, then those children will learn to talk like a book, and they'll learn to write like a book. And this is something that doesn't take considerable amount of effort if we just simply immerse them in that world. So what I'm saying is, yes, this is complex, and that's okay, because children can learn how to understand and produce this language. So, okay, so now I'm done reading this, and now I'm sorry, I realized that I interrupted the whole flow of this test. It doesn't take this long, by the way, to administer. Let's think about really how deep we're into this test. We are 1 minute in so far right here where this child has read. And now maybe about another 30 seconds, 45 seconds to finish reading the rest of the passage, okay? And now I click on this proceed to the retell, and I say to the child, "Thanks for reading and listening. Now you tell me that exact same story. Try to include as many details as you can in your story." Now I am collecting a language sample here. Now, what I'm going to try to do, though, is I am going to try to score this language sample while it is coming at me in real time. At first, this may feel pretty daunting, but after you practice this a little bit, you'll get very proficient at it. And also, there's a little scaffold that we have up here that everyone can take advantage of. You can audio record that student retelling the story, which at first grade might burn about 30 seconds of your life. And you record that student retelling the story, and then you can play it back and spend another 30 seconds and listen to it again to make sure that you got the parts that you're listening for. And what are those parts that you're listening for? They're the very same things that lead to, that that reflect complex language. So at the discourse level, expository and narrative, at the sentence level, and at the vocabulary level. So, and I just want to explain just briefly that when you're looking for complex language, speech language pathologists spend a lot of time learning how to identify adverbial subordinate clauses that are temporal and causal. They spend a lot of time learning how to identify relative subordinate clauses and adverbs and adjectives and complements and all of these features of language. And Carol Westby and Carol Strong and Marilyn Depold have outlined for us what it is that makes language like a book. What is it that makes it complex? And it's features like those. Instead of asking people, though, to identify a causal adverbial subordinate clause, we simply say, listen for the word because or so that. That causal word indicates that it's very likely that there's a subordinate clause happening. Essentially, you're getting what we call a subordination index by just simply identifying the words that the child says in their narrative. Now, this can be done, of course, in real time, but also can be done listening to the audio. You can even listen to the child's story with the child sitting right there with you. They retell the story and you say, just a second, let's listen to that story that you just told one more time. I want to make sure I got everything right. They'll love it. And then you also will listen for vocabulary, not the kind of vocabulary that children typically use out at recess, but vocabulary that reflects complex language. So tier 2 words. Okay, so it just goes like this. You ask the child to list, thanks for listening. Now tell me the exact same story. Try to include as many details as you can. The child starts talking. Now I'm listening for story grammar primarily. And you can see that it is scored on a scale of 0, 1, and 2. So 0 means they didn't include that part of the story. 1 means that it was included, but it's not very complete or very clear. And 2 means that it's a complete and clear inclusion of that part. Elisa, do you want to be my student? You're my first grader. I hope you don't even remember the story, because then this will be very realistic. We'll see how you do.
All right.
Okay, thanks
Are
for
you
listening.
ready?
Now you tell me that exact same story. Try to include as many details as you can in your story.
Okay. One day, Ron went to the amusement park to ride rides. He started to feel sick because he went on a ride that rotated.
Mhm.
Then he went and found his dad and said, I think I'm gonna throw up. And his dad said, I think you have motion sickness.
Ooh,
Um, Maybe we should find a different ride. Then Ron was happy. The end.
okay, that was great. Wow, you are quite the first grader. That was astonishing. Okay, he was happy. So that's okay. I forgot to click record, but you can see how easy it is. I click record and here it is recording me. And then I can click stop and then I can say, you know what? I just want to hear that one more time, Elisa. But you can see how easy it is. I click record and here it is recording. And then I can hear Elisa's story. And I think she might have had something in here that I might have missed. I got distracted by her amazing vocabulary, but I can check this. Now, so I want to take the pressure off of you a little bit here in thinking that, oh my gosh, I got to score this kid's story in real time. I have all these things to manage. Just take it easy and listen to the audio again if you need to. You will get incredibly proficient at it. And in the research that we've done across several studies, our inter-rater reliability scoring in real time is above 90%, actually. Now, that does mean that we will disagree sometimes on whether something is a 2-point or a 1-point. The reason why that standard error of measurement is okay, though, is because you will be doing oral language instruction, tier 1 with your students that's explicit and systematic, and your students will experience considerable growth in their ability to understand and produce complex language when you do that. And their performance at the beginning of the year will not reflect at all their performance at the end of the year when you put that kind of explicit and systematic language instruction at play. Okay, So now I'm done with that. And now, Elisa, what I want to do is I want to ask you some questions. And you can see that these are my factual questions. Now, the reason why they're already scored for me, most of them, is because Elisa already told me that information in her retell. So I don't need to ask her any of these questions other than, and she might have told me this, I might have missed it. But Elisa, how did the story end?
I think he found another ride to go on.
That's great. And what two things did you learn about motion sickness from this story?
All I can remember is that he had fluid in his ears, maybe, that moved and made him sick.
That's amazing. Wow, that's great. Okay, so I've got some factual information now about her ability to answer factual questions. Now, what I want to know also is I don't want to just know if she produces the tier two words that are in the story. Her ability to produce and understand tier two words is so incredibly dependent on her exposure to those words in her life. And vocabulary assessments, and those of us who do language assessments know this is the case. Vocabulary assessments are very, very poor measures of language ability because of that confound. I mean, Elisa may not know what a sockeye salmon is, although she may, but she may not know what a sockeye salmon is, and that's probably not because she has a disorder. So what instead we're doing is we're measuring also a student's ability to infer the meaning of words from context. That's how most of our words are acquired. So it goes like this. I'm going to ask question 1A first. Now, if Elisa can answer that with clear accuracy or at least some semblance of correctness, then perfect. Then I'll go on to the next question. If she can't answer the question, then I'll do 1B, which is a forced choice. So it goes like this. Okay, Elisa, he was on a ride that rotated. He needed a calm, relaxing place to rest. What does rotate mean?
Does it mean to go?
That's good. That's good. So does rotate mean to spin or to go high?
Ah, to spin.
Great. Now we have in the manual, we have guidelines for how to score this, okay? And full disclosure here, right? We're obviously engaged in a process here, right? This is the CUBED-3 and the CUBED-4 will be coming soon, and the CUBED-5 after that. We'll continually be doing research to improve. Our inter-rater reliability on this particular task is probably only about 80% or so. So we have some refinements to do, there's no question. The manual absolutely helps you, though, in guiding you how to score this. So you would ask these questions here and get an idea of how well your student can infer the meaning of unfamiliar words from context. And we also want to know, this is what you don't get from a retell. We also want to know how well a student can make inferences. So the first two questions are about how well a student can infer meaning from the text. And then the second one is a question about making inferences from background knowledge or life experiences. So it goes like this. Using clues from the story, how many rides do you think were at the park?
I think they had a lot of rides at the park
Okay, why do you think that?
because he found another one to go on.
It's great. Using clues from this story, how many times do you think Ron had motion sickness before?
None.
Now, why do you think that?
Because he didn't know what it was and his dad had to explain it to him.
That's great. You know, we should be doing this test with like a fourth grader. You're just such a smart first grader. Okay, what kind of snacks do you think they ate at the carnival?
Mm, Popcorn.
Okay, now why do you think that?
So when I was at the carnival, I had popcorn.
Notice how you're able to gain connection here. And students may have never been to a carnival, but they've been to something related, most likely. And what you're doing is you're gaining information, not just about this very specific context, but also their ability to make connections. Okay. Now that's pretty much it. Now it takes a whole lot longer for me to explain this process than to go through it with you, right? So let's say we've sat down with our student. We're maybe about 5 minutes into this test. And what I've done now is I've obtained information on Elisa's oral reading fluency. I've obtained information on rate and accuracy, including prosody. I've obtained information on her ability to retell a passage that has complex academic language in it. That tells me how well she can understand it and produce it, which of course are parallel to reading comprehension and writing. Now, I'm also able to understand how well she can include or understand factual information, including some expository information, and how well she can infer the meaning of complex vocabulary words from context, and how well she can make inferences from the text and make connections to her life experiences. Okay, now that's all happened in 5 minutes. Now, why can all of that be accomplished so quickly and in just this single assessment? Because it is a language sample, and a language sample simply reflects language and all aspects of language, right? So, okay, now I'm done with this, and notice that there's these little indicators down here, and they tell me about whether Elisa is meeting benchmark expectations. So if we go back here to the retell, it told us that she was at low risk. So she's a benchmark here for her ability to understand and produce this complex language. But in the questions here, she did have some difficulty. And it had to do with this right here. You can see I didn't score it. And so, of course, it thinks that she's at a 0. So I proceed to personal writing. Now, this is something that we often don't do for benchmarking, but you could, right? Or you could use it as a probe. We say, in the story, Ron was scared because his stomach suddenly felt sick. Write a story about a time when you felt sick. And we have some writing forms that accompany it. And we also have a rubric that you can use to score this student's writing. Okay, but often that's not done in the benchmarking. Teachers frequently do it, though, for progress monitoring. So you click on Review Final Scores and then Submit Scores. Okay, so now I'm going to close this test. And this just simply takes me back to Angela here. And now what I've done is I have tested Angela. I can go back into Assess here, and it'll tell me now, okay, you've administered this benchmark here for reading. Okay, now, there are, of course, other things that can be administered. Now, let's say that Angela was not at benchmark, or Elisa was not at benchmark on the, let's say she wasn't at benchmark on the reading fluency, okay? So now what I want to know is why. So this is the only time when I'm going to dig deeper, right? She's not at benchmark on oral reading fluency, and I want to know what's going on. Now, the reason why I can say this is because if she was at benchmark on oral reading fluency, I know that she can decode words that likely reflect what she's been taught. Closed syllable, vowel teams, vowel consonant E, most likely, right? So if she's not, though, I am going to dig deeper. So I want to do this decoding inventory. It's very simple. I just place this in front of Elisa. You can print it out, or there's a student reading mode here that the student can see these words. And what you do is you just say to them, please read these words. They're not real words. And then you just have these words in front of them. Now notice these are the closed syllable, this first target here. And so Elisa would go through and read, and I'm just going to track the extent to which she can recode these nonsense words, okay? Here she is in the middle of first grade, and look, if she can read 3 out of the 6 of these in the middle of first grade on this particular target, she's low risk. Now I can go to the next one. Oops, now I can go to the next one. And I'll say, please read these words. They're not real words. Here's vowel consonant E. Okay, same exact thing. I can measure the extent to which she can recode these words. Okay, and then it continues on, right? So I can get great inventory on where the breakdown is. Why was she not at benchmark on the reading fluency part? Okay, now I also, with this student, I can, let's say she was not at benchmark on the retell. So I want to know, why was Elisa not at benchmark on the retell part of this assessment? Well, what I can do is there's one very, very, possible confound here. And it is that I've only administered this benchmark one time to her, and I just asked her to read a part of the passage, and then I read the rest of it to her, and it was replete with complex academic language. And this may have been a shock to her system, and that's very possible. And this happens frequently. We've learned that the first administration, sometimes students do much more poorly on the first administration than the second because they had no idea what was coming at them. So what I can do is administer a second NLM reading to Elisa. Now, this might take a couple of minutes to do, but it certainly gives me much more confidence that it is hard for her to understand this complex language, right? So I have her read again, and then I read the rest of it, and then I go through the whole process of having her retell. And it doesn't want me to go on until I mark her prosody, by the way. That's an important thing to note in a student's reading. So, okay, now I realize that you might be thinking, well, this is a lot, but this is only a lot if you want to know. If you want to know, what is it that's making this child struggle? Why are they having difficulty with comprehension? And now let's say that she was still below benchmark on both of these reading tasks with the retell. Well, I can also go here to the NLM listening. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting out the reading modality completely. Maybe that's the confound. Maybe that's the reason why she's struggling with comprehension, is because the decoding is getting in the way. She can't decode the words to access the comprehension, the language. So I say, I'm going to tell you a story. Please listen carefully, or when I'm done, you're going to tell me the exact same story, and I'm going to ask you some questions. Listen very carefully. Are you ready? Now, I'll read this passage to her. Same complexity of language that you see in the reading, but it's just in the listening form, and have her retell it. Now, if she does really well on this, or let's just say she's at benchmark on this retell, I now know that the reason why she wasn't at benchmark on comprehension earlier in the reading comprehension task was because of very likely a word recognition factor. But if she does poorly on this language comprehension and production task, then I am honing in on very likely the culprit here. That it could be both, right? It could be word recognition and oral language, but it certainly does give me an idea of what to focus on. Okay. So let's see. There's some other things in here that you could certainly hone in on also, like measuring someone's their phonemic awareness. This is another thing that you can measure. The really important things to measure in phonemic awareness, of course, is phoneme segmentation and phoneme blending, because those are the ones that perfectly parallel decoding and writing, right? And spelling. Okay. All right. Now, I realize I'm going very fast, but what I'm hoping that I'm highlighting here is the reality of being able to measure a child's language in an efficient way that still maintains an interpretation that is valid. Okay. So let's say now that I'm done testing. My students in my classroom are tested now. What I get when I go to reports is this screen, and it tells me this is how your students are doing in your classroom. And these are your students right here. And I say, I want to know which of my students are really struggling with comprehension, with language comprehension. So I can click on this high under this NLM retell. I can click on this high right here. High risk. And it tells me these two students right here are at high risk. They struggled with the retell task. Let's say I want to know who's high and moderate risk. Okay, it's these students in my classroom right here. Now I can group these students together. I can click here on these students and I can say, I want to group these three students right here together, and I'm going to name them group 1 language, and I'll create a group. And then I want to group the other students here, and they're going to be another group for me. They're group 2 for language, okay? But you can see what this allows you to do. This allows you to identify where the students are struggling. Here's my students that are having difficulty with reading fluency. That's what I want to target. Now, notice how I'm not grouping students exclusively based on their reading fluency performance. That is not the appropriate way to provide explicit and systematic language instruction, nor is it really the way to determine what a student needs specifically to work on for the outcome of reading fluency. Okay. So you can see how I can do all of that. Now I can also click on this student, I think it was Angela, and I can really see exactly how Angela did. I can go to her progress and I can see that this is reading fluency for Angela. Here's the beginning of the year. This is the benchmark data. This is her score. So she was 25 correct words per minute at the beginning of first grade at benchmark. And here's my progress monitoring that I did. And now she's superseding the expectation for middle of the year. And this is the end of the year trajectory, okay? The expectation. I can also see this here. This is her retell performance, whether it's written from an NLM reading or NLM language, it doesn't matter. This is her ability to retell that complex language. And you can see that here she was at moderate risk at the beginning of the year. And now here we are monitoring her progress. This is the middle of the year and she's at benchmark. And then we need to continue on to get to the end of the year. Okay. And this is her performance on questions. Okay, so I get information, of course, on that specific student. And what this also does is if I click on summary of results here, it tells me very specifically with this student where her weaknesses and strengths are. And it tells me these are the things that she needs to work on with either tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, whatever you're providing this student. This student needs to work on basic story grammar, complex sentences, and complex vocabulary. And notice how it immediately leads to explicit and systematic instruction that with the right programming is cumulative and is also yields diagnostic information. Well, as a clinician, you are diagnostic as you're doing intervention. So this information, if I have time, I'm going to show you just really quickly how this information directly leads to this multi-tiered language instruction that you can do with our research that we've done for a lot of years now with Story Champs or something like it, right? So, okay, let's see. Is there anything else in here? If I just want to see the recommendations for a particular time period, I can see that. If I've recorded, it tells me which of these tests have a recording on them, and I can go back and listen to it if I want.
And along with that, Dr. Petersen, don't forget, we're getting the transcripts that are coming along very soon.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot that. Let me scoot over here to my slides for just a second. So, okay, so it's true that when you're administering the test, you can click the audio record button and it'll record the student. Now, in a couple of weeks, this system will also take that child's audio sample and it will transcribe it for you. And it looks like this. I realize I'm not in presentation mode. Just forgive me. Hope you're okay with that. What it will do is it will show you, now this is just nonsense up here, but this is the transcript of that student's story. And that transcript is on a window that's overlaid on top of the assessment. You can move this window around wherever you want, and you can look at it and you can read that child's story and score it also. So if you don't want to go back and just keep listening to it or what have you, the transcript is right there in front of you. Now, of course, the possibilities are pretty profound here also, where what happens is you ask a child to retell a story and you audio record it and it's transcribed automatically for you. And then you take that transcription and the program that we're developing right now will score that transcription for you. And then there's, I mean, I don't know how much I should promote things like ChatGPT, but it's moving along quickly and it's pretty good. Elisa, you did a study, and so did Trina Spencer and Megan, on AI scoring narrative language samples. What kind of reliability did you come up with?
Yeah, we were hitting in like the high 80s, like 88% accuracy.
Okay,
It was
yeah,
very exciting. You
yeah.
also have 3 questions from the chat when you get a chance.
Okay. All right. What I want to do then, just real quick, I'm going to go full screen on this just for a moment, and then I'm going to answer some questions. But first, I do want to just show people really quick what you do with the results of this assessment, because this is not just an assessment that you administer for fun and then you shelve it and you don't look at the data or attend to it, right? The data actually means something. It tells you exactly what you need to work on with this child across all of the factors of language and word recognition, including, by the way, factors such as executive function. Because if a child has difficulty with retelling a passage, retelling something, this can implicate that it's difficult for them to attend to that particular information as well. Okay, but enough of that for a moment. I just want to share with you all this idea that in the speech language pathology world, we have come to recognize after a lot of research, and it's not just in the speech path world, across education, that there are essential characteristics of effective teaching. And those are explicit and systematic and cumulative and diagnostic in nature. And they overlay, these approaches are applied to all aspects of language. Now, notice that language comprehension, the instruction of it is contextualized. These strands are not taught in a singular, discrete trial approach, disconnected from meaningful connected language. Now, and word recognition instruction is synthetic. You move into the synthesis of those sounds, okay? So now I'm just saying this because what we need to teach, we understand. We know what it is that results in the comprehension of complex language. And we know clearly that these are the principles that really guide effective instruction. You can see these in Teresa Ukrainit's work on systematic and explicit language instruction and many other researchers. And with Story Champs, that I just want to show you really quickly, something that we've done research on for the past 15 years. There's over 40 peer-reviewed publications. And all I want to actually do is get through all of this. It has all these pictures and everything, but it also has these lesson plans where it allows you to provide explicit and systematic language instruction. It tells the examiner or the teacher or the interventionist exactly what to do. And there are pictures and icons that guide the instruction, and you can target exactly what it is that your student or your group of students needs work with. This is what you would do for a basic story structure. This is what you would do if a student needs to focus on tier 2 vocabulary. Notice it's still in the context of a story. Fictional generation, writing, information, and so forth. Okay, I'll get out of this. I just thought I would share with you that this is not about just identifying children who have weaknesses in language and then letting them roll and keeping things going business as usual, which, by the way, has resulted in essentially very limited progress in our students' performance on reading comprehension measures. And the reason why we have had limited progress is not just because of word recognition difficulty. Absolutely important to have explicit systematic phonics instruction. But in addition to that, it is absolutely crucial to have explicit and systematic language instruction that focuses on complex language. Okay, now I know I only have 3 minutes, but I'm ready. I'm ready for my questions. Well, maybe we'll see. Okay.
Okay, so the first one, I'm going to give you a 2-minute timer. So, because we have 3 questions specifically, but what is the validity and reliability of this assessment tool in relation to our CLD students?
Oh, what a fabulous question. Okay, so the CUBED assessment does have norms, by the way. And we have norms for monolingual English speaking children, and we also have separate norms because we had a large enough sample for multilingual English, Spanish speaking students. We didn't slice things any thinner than that for the normative samples. We have those two separate. Now, here's another answer to that question, though, which is this. This assessment is a criterion referenced, primarily a criterion referenced measure. That means that we said, what are the curriculum expectations for children? And we said, that's the benchmark. Now, notice how incredibly culturally insensitive that is, how culturally insensitive our system is to have just an established benchmark expectation for all students. And fair, we should acknowledge that. There's no question. Now, what this assessment tells you is it's not diagnostic per se. It is simply telling you this child is having difficulty understanding and producing complex language in English. Now, we are not loading that with any sort of value other than this means that it is very likely they will struggle with reading comprehension and with writing, this very Eurocentric specific expectation that we have in the schools for reading the textbook or reading the books that they're expected to read and writing how we expect them to write. Okay. So that's what it tells you. Now, this is okay, though, to add to someone's multi-dialecticalism. Is that a word? I just made it up if it isn't. It's okay to be multi-dialectal, to have multiple dialects, to code switch. It's okay to translanguage. That's all okay, as long as we know we're not taking away a child's language or a dialect or anything like that. We're simply adding to it so that they can be successful in this particular setting, which is the school setting. Okay, I don't know if that was 2 minutes or not, but Megan, I'm ready for the next one.
Okay, no, it means it's appropriate. What level of English proficiency, though, does a child need to have for the cubed? And, what WIDA score, if you can remember that.
Yeah, so we have administered this test to a lot of children with a WIDA score of 1. Now, if their MLU is not 2 or higher, and it's very difficult for them to understand the instructions, the directions, then you're going to have to do the cubed in Spanish, which we have. Or sorry, and if the child speaks another language other than Spanish, then we would recommend you do a dynamic assessment, okay, with that child. But again, the English language proficiency is a factor, but only to the extent to where if you can't get any information from that child. If you can get any information at all, then that's valuable information, and it tells you how well they can understand currently, how well they can understand and produce language, English language that's complex. And that's informative. That tells you where to start intervention, right?
Right, especially if your academic language instruction is going to be primarily in English, right? So we need to know where the access points are for them and how difficult is it for them to learn. And let's say in a whole group setting where there is no bilingual or multilingual instruction, right? So I encourage people to look at it that way. Wonderful. All right, last question. If anybody else has questions, please email us at training@languagedynamicsgroup.com, singular training@languagedynamics, plural, group.com. And we will get back to you. The certificate link is in the chat. Christy will post it one more time because she messed up she already commented about it. So messed up your sequence, Christy. So the last question we will take for tonight is, are there any plans to make it a normed assessment?
Oh, yes.
Say the best for last.
It's such a great question. Now, I want to just emphasize, of course, that the primary purpose of the cubed is to be a criterion referenced universal screening and progress monitoring general outcome measure, right? That is its primary purpose. But there's no doubt that the cubed is administered by tens of thousands of people across the world. And we have collected data ourselves as researchers from a lot of children. And so that easily facilitates norming. Well, I would never say that norming a test is easy, but I can say that we have the data to do so. And the question or the answer is yes, it's absolutely in the works. And I know that our our speech language pathologists in particular are really interested in this, but I do want to just say that we are in the process of norming a dynamic assessment of language and reading that is really a companion to the cubed, and the purpose of that test is diagnosis. And that is a norm reference dynamic assessment, which if I can ever get the manual done, will be out and available soon. And that test, of course, can be diagnostic, not just for SLPs. I don't always mean to keep singling out my friends out there. Okay, thank you all so much. I just want to clarify one thing. It's not as daunting as it may seem. It is a simple process. You're just asking a child to retell something, and then you're scoring it in real time, and then also listening to the audio if you need to, or looking at the transcript. It's okay. And, it might take you 5 minutes, but that is well worth it to actually obtain valid information on a student's ability to understand and produce complex language. Okay, thank you all for bearing with me for the whole hour. I had a lot of fun. I felt like I pretty much was just talking to myself, but thanks for listening. Okay, back to you, Megan or Elisa.
Elisa, go ahead and close us out and remind folks that we have the certificate in the chat. We'll post it one more time. And again, email us at training@languagedynamicsgroup.com if you'd like a copy of the slides, but all who attend are going to get a copy of the recording because there's a lot of video, not a lot of slides. And that's on purpose. All right, thank you, everybody. Off to you, Elisa.
Yes, and join us next month for our next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, morning, wherever you are in the world.
And go Pokes from the University of Wyoming. Woohoo!